It's funny, the things that stick with you. Most of my childhood memories are a bit hazy, like old photographs. But this one night, this one's crystal clear, like it happened yesterday instead of 15 years ago. I must have been about 10, maybe 11. We lived in this fairly new subdivision at the time, the kind where all the houses look vaguely similar and the trees are still too small to offer much privacy. It wasn't out in the sticks or anything, but it wasn't exactly bustling either, especially on a weeknight. My parents had gone to some work dinner thing for my dad's company. It was a rare occasion for them to both be out late, so it felt like a big deal for me to be home by myself. They trusted me. I was a pretty responsible kid, and our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, an older lady who was always baking something, knew I was alone and had told me to call her if I needed anything. Standard procedure. So there I was, parked in front of the TV in the living room, probably watching cartoons or some cheesy action movie I wasn't really supposed to be watching, feeling pretty grown up. The house was quiet except for the TV and the hum of the refrigerator. I remember I had a big bowl of popcorn, and I was making a bit of a mess as kids do. It was probably around 9 p.m., starting to get properly dark outside. I was half dozing on the couch when I heard it. A sound from the kitchen. It was a soft clink, like someone setting a glass down on the counter. My head popped up. The TV was still blaring, so at first I thought maybe it was a sound effect from the show. But then I heard it again, a little louder this time. More like a cupboard door closing gently. My stomach did that little flip-flop thing. I muted the TV. The silence in the house suddenly felt heavy. "Hello?" I called out, my voice a bit wobbly. Nothing, just the refrigerator humming. I told myself it was probably just the house settling, or maybe the ice maker doing its thing. Old houses creak, new houses settle, right? But ours wasn't that new, and that sound had been too specific. I got off the couch feeling a bit silly, but also a bit nervous, and peeked around the corner into the kitchen. The lights were off, just the glow from the oven clock. Everything looked normal. No open cupboards, no glasses out of place. I stood there for a good minute listening. Nothing. I started to think I'd just imagined it, maybe drifted off and dreamt it. I went back to the living room, unmuted the TV, but I couldn't really concentrate on it anymore. Every little noise from outside a car door, slamming down the street, a dog barking, made me jump. About 10 minutes later, I heard something else. This time it was from upstairs, a distinct soft thud, like something being dropped on the carpeted floor of my parents' bedroom, which was right above the living room. Okay, that wasn't the house settling. My heart started thumping properly now. This was different. This felt wrong. I muted the TV again. The silence was deafening. I thought about calling Mrs. Henderson, but what would I say? I think I heard a noise. She'd probably think I was just being a scaredy cat. I decided I had to be brave, had to check it out. I mean, what if it was a raccoon that got in somehow? Unlikely, but it was the only rational thing I could think of. I crept to the bottom of the stairs, peering up into the dim landing. The upstairs hallway light was off. Is anyone up there?" I whispered. Stupid, I know if someone was up there, they weren't going to answer. I took a deep breath and started to slowly, quietly walk up the stairs, each step creaking like a gunshot in the silence. When I got to the top, I stood there for a moment listening. Nothing. Just a kind of faint rustling sound. It was so quiet I could barely hear it, like fabric brushing against something. It seemed to be coming from my parents' bedroom. Their door was slightly ajar, maybe an inch or two, just enough to see a sliver of darkness inside. I remember my hand shaking as I reached out and pushed the door open a little wider. I didn't turn on the light. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd see better in the dark if my eyes adjusted. Or maybe I was just too scared to make myself a target. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. The only light came from the streetlight outside, filtering weakly through the gap in the curtains. And that's when I saw it. Or rather, I saw the shape of it. Standing by my mom's dresser near the window was a figure. It was tall, or at least it seemed tall to me, and slender, completely still. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark silhouette against the faint light from the window. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It was like I was frozen. The figure didn't move either, it just stood there. It wasn't making any sound now the rustling had stopped. We just stayed like that for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds. Me staring at it. I assumed it was looking at me, even though I couldn't see a face. Then very, very slowly it raised an arm, and it pointed, right at me. That's what broke the spell. I didn't think, I just turned and fled. I stumbled down the stairs, nearly falling, ran to the front door, fumbled with the locks, and burst outside. I didn't even grab my shoes. I ran across the lawn to Mrs. Henderson's house, pounding on her door, crying by this point. She was, of course, very concerned. She called my parents, then she called the police. My parents rushed home, the police arrived. They searched the house from top to bottom. They found nothing. No sign of forced entry, nothing out of place except for the slightly open bedroom door. They said it was probably just my imagination being alone in the house, the shadows playing tricks. Maybe I'd had a nightmare and woken up confused. I knew what I saw, I knew that figure was real, but how could I prove it? There was no evidence. My parents tried to comfort me, said I was safe, but I didn't sleep in my own bed for a week. I slept on a mattress on their floor. The thing that haunts me the most, though, isn't just seeing the figure, it's what happened a few days later. My mom was cleaning their bedroom, and she found something under her dresser, pushed way back against the wall. It was one of my little toy soldiers, one of those cheap green plastic ones. I hadn't played with those in years, and I definitely hadn't taken them into my parents' room. It had been in a box in my closet. There was no way it could have gotten there on its own, and I remember vividly that when the figure pointed at me, its hand was sort of cupped, like it might have been holding something small. I never told my parents about finding the toy soldier there. I don't know why. Maybe I thought they wouldn't believe me or it would just scare them more. But I've thought about it a lot over the years. Was it the figure that dropped it? Or was it already there and it was just a coincidence? I'll never know. But sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet house, I still feel that chill. And I can almost see that dark silhouette standing by a window pointing, and I wonder what it wanted. Living in the quiet, secluded cabin tucked away in rural upstate New York for the past 5 years had been precisely what I sought. A complete detachment from the city's incessant clamor, a refuge sprawling amidst vast, dense woodlands that stretched far beyond my property line, miles away from the nearest neighbor, where the only sounds were the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional distant bird call, fostering a profound sense of peace that truly suited my disposition. Fishing on the serene lake just behind my house occupied most of my days, providing the perfect solitary escape, and I thoroughly enjoyed my own company, finding solace in the quietude, particularly on the spacious deck that overlooked the endless expanse of trees, where I often sat, a cold beer in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon as the nocturnal chorus of the woods began its familiar symphony, a routine that had always been utterly tranquil until quite recently. It commenced approximately 2 weeks prior. I was on the deck as usual, simply gazing into the deepening twilight, when a distinct snap of a twig echoed from the distance, a sound I barely registered at first, dismissing it as a deer or a raccoon, as the woods were teeming with wildlife, and I had long grown accustomed to its varied sounds. However, as the days progressed, these subtle disturbances became more frequent. Initially, just the isolated twig snaps or the soft rustling of leaves, sounds easily attributable to animal movements. But then one particular night, a new, more unsettling sound emerged, a gentle scratching, emanating from the side of the house, somewhere near the spare bedroom window. It was quiet, almost deliberate, as if attempting discretion. I stood up my chair, scraping faintly against the deck, my heart quickening just a touch, and I waited, but nothing further transpired, prompting me to conclude it was likely just a squirrel, though a vague sense of unease settled upon me, leading me to head inside and ensure all doors were secured for the night. The following evening the scratching returned, but this time it was unmistakably closer. seemingly originating from directly outside the spare bedroom window itself. I froze, listening intently, my nerves beginning to fray, as an inexplicable sensation suggested something was fundamentally awry. Moving cautiously, I approached the window, drawing back the curtains a mere fraction to peer into the darkness. But the moonlight illuminated only the empty yard, casting long, familiar shadows from the trees, with no animal or person visible, leading me to shake my head and rationalize the sound as merely a branch brushing against the pane, or perhaps just the wind, a conclusion that allowed me to eventually return to bed. Yet the subsequent night the scratching intensified, evolving beyond mere scratching into a lighter rhythmic tapping, akin to someone gently rapping on the window, attempting to draw my attention. My heart gave a sudden jump, and I was out of bed, grabbing a flashlight, moving quietly down the darkened hallway towards the spare bedroom. Upon reaching the window, I shone the beam outwards, revealing nothing, no individual, no creature. Just the familiar empty woods, but the unsettling feeling persisted. A distinct sense that I was not alone, that the very air around me felt dense, oppressive. I retreated to bed, but found sleep elusive, every minor house creak seeming amplified, every floorboard groaning as if underfoot, and I remained awake listening until sheer exhaustion finally claimed me. The nights continued and the sounds remained constant. A recurring pattern of taps, scratches, and occasionally a faint whisper that seemed to emanate from within the very walls of the cabin, making it increasingly difficult to ignore until one particular night. I decided to confront the source of these disturbances, reasoning it might simply be an animal that had found its way inside. Arming myself with a crowbar from the shed, a precautionary measure, should the situation prove peculiar, I approached the spare bedroom door and carefully pushed it open. The air within was stale, undisturbed for months, and I swept the flashlight beam across the room, checking every corner, beneath the bed, behind the dresser, finding absolutely nothing. I stood there for a minute, feeling somewhat foolish, the room appearing entirely empty, but as I turned to leave, my gaze snagged on something. The closet door was slightly ajar, a position I distinctly did not recall leaving it in. My stomach tightened. Slowly, I pulled the door fully open, revealing an empty space. Yet as the flashlight beam pierced the deepest corner, I saw it. A small piece of dark, torn fabric caught on the edge of the wall, almost like a fragment of clothing. My breath caught, my mind raced a frantic whirl of questions. Had someone been here? Had someone been inside my home? I backed out of the room, my heart throbbing audibly, slamming the door shut and bolting it, the thought of remaining inside another second utterly unbearable. I stepped outside, hoping the cool night air would clear my head, but the enveloping darkness of the woods felt almost suffocating, though I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it as mere nerves, the insidious effect of prolonged isolation. I spent that night on the couch, a baseball bat within easy reach, and the cabin remained silent, no scratching, no tapping, almost eerily quiet. The following night, determined to overcome my apprehension, I resolved to sleep in my own bed, refusing to be driven from my home by whatever this was. But just as I was about to succumb to sleep, the familiar tap, tap, tap resonated from the window. I jumped up, heart racing, grabbing the flashlight, and rushed to the spare bedroom, oblivious to the noise of my own hurried footsteps. This time, as I pulled back the curtain, the view was not merely the empty woods. A distinct shadow was visible, a figure standing just outside the window, barely discernible in the dim ambient light. I froze, my blood chilling in my veins, then spun around, my mind reeling. Who was that? What were they doing here? The horrifying reality was undeniable now. Someone had been outside my house, and they had been watching me. I grabbed my phone, my hand trembling so violently that dialing 911 was an effort, but the operator answered, and I managed to stammer through my heightened state of panic. "Someone's been outside my house," I choked out, "and I think they're still here." I provided my address, and they confirmed, dispatching officers immediately. I ended the call and scanned the room, a desperate need to leave surging through me, but as I turned to grab my jacket, a slow creak echoed from the hallway. Someone was moving through the house. I did not hesitate. I bolted for the back door, flinging it open and tearing into the woods, running as fast as my lungs would allow without daring to look back, my muscles burning with each stride. By the time I reached the periphery of my property, the distant flashing blue and red lights of police cars were visible. I slowed my body shaking and concealed myself behind a tree, observing as the officers arrived, guns drawn systematically searching the cabin, but I did not remain to learn the outcome. I simply could not. I knew with an unshakable certainty that whatever or whoever had been in that house, it was not finished. I was no longer safe there. I have not returned since, though I followed up with the police to confirm my well-being, ensuring no search would be mounted for me. The cabin still stands isolated in the woods, but it is no longer my home. Every time I close my eyes, I still hear the tapping sounds, and the profound, terrifying question of who was in my house, and what they truly wanted, remains unanswered. A chilling, persistent presence that always reminds me they were waiting for me, and they are still out there. My grandfather, a man of simple habits and strong convictions, had built his house nearly 60 years prior, a sturdy, unassuming structure perched atop a small hill, surrounded by acres of dense, untouched forest land. Despite its age, the property remained impeccably maintained, a testament to his meticulous nature, though the vast, unlit basement, which was accessible by a steep wooden staircase just off the kitchen, had always possessed a certain chill, a pervasive dampness, that made me instinctively avoid it. After he passed, the responsibility of the property fell to my parents, who, being unable to move there permanently, frequently tasked me with looking after it during their various trips, periods that often stretched for weeks, leaving me as the sole occupant of the expansive quiet house, a duty I usually carried out with a calm efficiency, despite the inherent isolation of the location. It was during one such tenure, a particularly quiet, late autumn week, that the accustomed tranquility of the house began to unravel, not with dramatic flair, but with a subtle, unnerving shift in its familiar rhythms, beginning with an almost imperceptible change in the air itself. The initial incidents were minor, easily dismissed as the ordinary quirks of an old house. A faint, earthy smell that seemed to drift from the basement, a scent reminiscent of damp soil, and something faintly metallic, which I attributed to the changing weather, or perhaps a leaky pipe I hadn't yet noticed. Then came the soft creaks from below, noises that I would simply ignore, thinking it was just the house settling, or the old pipes expanding and contracting. Yet as the days progressed, the faint odor became more noticeable, more insistent, no longer subtle but distinctly present even on the main floor, a damp, earthy smell that suggested something beyond a minor plumbing issue, something more organic, more deeply rooted in the very foundation of the house. The creaks, too, became more distinct, taking on a subtle cadence, almost a rhythm, as if something heavy were being moved slowly, deliberately across the unfinished concrete floor of the basement. A sound that, while still faint, possessed an unnerving intentionality. I found myself instinctively pausing whenever I heard these sounds, my head cocked slightly, listening, trying to determine their source, though my rational mind always supplied a ready explanation, like the grandfather's old tools shifting in a corner, or perhaps even a large rodent, though the weight of the sounds seemed to contradict this last notion. The unease intensified when the sounds began to ascend. One quiet evening, while I was reading in the living room, a distinct thud echoed from the basement staircase. Not a natural creak, but a heavy, deliberate sound, as if something solid had just impacted a step, and my attention was immediately drawn to it, my gaze fixed on the closed basement door beside the kitchen. After a long moment of silence, the thud was followed by a soft, almost dragging sound, slowly making its way up the steps, a distinct scraping that clearly indicated something being pulled or pushed with considerable effort. The sounds continued slow and painstaking, until they reached the top of the stairs directly behind the closed basement door, where they abruptly ceased, leaving behind a profound silence that settled over the house. My heart began to beat a little faster, a subtle flutter in my chest, and I simply sat there listening, waiting for whatever might come next. But nothing did, only the heavy, oppressive stillness of the quiet house. I tried to rationalize it away as a particularly large animal trapped downstairs, perhaps trying to get out, but the deliberate nature of the sounds defied such a simple explanation. The unsettling quiet of the house continued for the remainder of the evening, but it was late that night, around 2 a.m., that the situation escalated beyond simple disquiet. I was woken abruptly by a series of distinct heavy footsteps directly overhead, coming from the first-floor kitchen, a slow, methodical pacing that clearly indicated a human presence, and I lay in bed utterly still listening, my mind frantically attempting to comprehend how anyone could be there who it could be. The footsteps moved from the kitchen towards the living room, then back towards the kitchen, a methodical, deliberate circuit that lasted for several minutes, the heavy thuds resonating through the floorboards directly above my head. My breath hitched in my throat. I did not move, simply lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sounds to stop, for morning to arrive, for the terrifying sounds to disappear, but they continued their slow, rhythmic pacing. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was palpable, heavier than anything I had experienced before, and then from directly outside my bedroom door I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible scrape, followed by a muffled low cough. My eyes snapped open, my body tensing. I did not move. I lay there absolutely still, listening as the silence stretched, broken only by the sound of my own breath. After a few agonizing minutes, a single distinct thud echoed from the other side of my door, a final heavy sound that felt strangely conclusive. I stayed in bed for what felt like hours, listening, waiting, until the first rays of dawn finally broke through my window, bathing the room in a pale, comforting light. The moment I felt safe, I got out of bed, moving slowly and cautiously to my bedroom door, gently turning the knob and pulling it open. The hallway was empty. The entire main floor of the house appeared undisturbed. As I walked into the kitchen, the light from the window illuminated the entrance to the basement, and my gaze immediately fixed on the top of the wooden stairs, where a single muddy footprint, clearly from a large worn boot, was pressed firmly into the dust of the landing, a fresh, undeniable mark. Below it, the basement door, which I had always kept securely latched, was now visibly ajar, a small gap at the bottom, revealing the pervasive darkness within. I did not enter the basement. I simply stood there staring at the open door, at the single muddy footprint, the realization settling over me, cold and clear that someone had indeed been in the house. I called my parents, explaining the situation in calm, measured tones, focusing on the displaced items and the open basement door, omitting any mention of the sounds or the inexplicable presence, and they advised me to lock myself in my room until the local sheriff could arrive. The sheriff arrived a short while later, searched the house and basement, found nothing, and concluded that a transient or local youth might have sought shelter, advising me to keep all doors and windows locked. I agreed, thanked him, and went back to my duty of looking after the house. I never saw the person, never heard them speak, and never found any actual damage or theft. Yet the memory of that single muddy footprint, the sounds from below, and the feeling of someone moving through the house while I slept still lingers. A quiet, chilling reminder that some quiet houses hold unexpected guests, and sometimes the most unsettling threats are those you never truly confront.